Hello everybody, welcome to an episode of Tales of Rebirth. We're going to be doing a Let's Play of this game because I haven't seen too many translations of this, and we're going to get started on this. So if you've never played Tales of Rebirth, it's one of the Japanese only games that was never released. It's probably, some people that have actually played this game have actually regarded as one of the best Tales games of all time. The thing with Tales of Rebirth is this game has a lot going for it that not too many people actually know about. For example, the story, the characters, the illustrations. I mean, the game itself is very well written, and I don't think too many people actually had a chance to play this game, considering the fact that it was Japanese only. Now, the game came out on December 16th of 2004 for the PS2. PS2 version was technically unfinished. I'm gonna just keep doing this because the game will load a demo if we keep it idolized. So anyways, this is Tales of Rebirth in English. This down here is the woman that did all the illustrations. Again, she did all the other Tales games too, and she still to this day does it. I actually had 5 parts of this already up if you want to watch some of the videos in the past that I've done, but for the most part we're pretty much just going to do like a Let's Play of this game, talking about how this game works, the ins and outs. Don't worry, I'm actually working on a bunch of patches for the, well, I mean, not just menu, like a bunch of screenshots too. I'm essentially writing a well-organized bunch of thumbnails of like the text coming up in order, and then essentially putting that, and then people can download it once I get all the NPC data. But the problem is, though, I got to find all the data first, which is a lot harder than it sounds, but at the same time, though, it's a lot easier once we have everything. So I also want to explain something else. Okay, so this is the sound room, and it said loading sound room is essentially what it says, checking data. These are all the songs in Tales of Rebirth. Now, essentially, as you can see the side here, you see like all this right here. This is all Japanese kanji. Well, the really cryptid brushstrokes are kanji. Essentially, this is just, you know, the whole, like all the different songs that are in the game. I think there might be one of them on here that's missing, and I believe that's the extra dungeon theme song, but I will have to go back and check that out actually. Okay, so this is like the song itself where you select the songs, and then there's all these little subgroups of like what fits in. This right here is all the voice. This is actually pretty interesting. This right here is every single voice clip in the game in the main menu. Well, I mean, from start to finish. This right here all the way up until the end. This part right here is all the, oh, is it this one? Yeah, this is all the main story voice clips from start to finish. This is all the characters like in battle, I believe, voice clips. This right here is something else. I think these are like the side quest ones, like the extra ones. And these essentially right here are something else. And this just adjusts the sound, so the level of it. All this pretty much just means down here is like the controls for it. This right here is just the menu. So like for example, this is message speed. The lower the number, the faster it instantaneously loads. This is like auto scrolling, so like when the voice, so you don't have to push a button, so in case you're like scared that maybe you might skip over the text, it'll read it out in Japanese and then it will scroll automatically, but it's on off by default. There's actually 6 difficulties: easy, normal, hard. Then there's mania, unknown, and then God mode, which God mode's only in the PSP version, which again we're playing. And mind you, we're going to be using my save file for my other game that has everything already loaded on it, but I'm kind of a little further in the game than I should be. So we're going to play up till a certain point, because I want to also explain what you start out with on a new game rather than a new game plus. So that's going to be it. This is like the button commands for, like, you know, changing the game's stuff. Funny story, Tales of Rebirth for some reason is the only Tales game that I know of that actually has a jump button in it. I do not know. That was a weird glitch. Yeah, right here, that's a jump button. this right here talks about like the camera scrolling, and then this just talks about where the camera is, the camera movement. This right here will talk about the, you know, the window file, the window text. Like you can readjust like the window colors, so that way it's good to organize stuff. This reverses like several button commands later on. And this just adds like extra effects to the camera. This has something to do, like pretty much all this stuff what you're seeing. You've seen this in other Tales games. This adjusts sound, voice, and music. Mind you, you know how some games have like the sound effects saved as the music audio? Well, you have the voice editing, the voice, the music level. Okay, so this is the sound effects level, the voice, like, you know, like the voice acting level, and then the music. So sound effects. Okay, so this is the music. This is the sound effects one, and then this is the voice clips. That should explain it. Okay. So essentially, if you've played any Tales game, you'll know like all these Tales games share something in common. So yeah. So now we're gonna start another game. We're gonna start out on easy mode. So again, if you've never played Tales of Rebirth, the story goes: this is Balka. This is the game that takes place in the middle of the world map, rather, in Tales of Rebirth. So this is the king, or they call him Higa, which is Japanese for like majesty, or it's a certain ranking. But his real name is actually Landorus, not Landorus like the Pokemon, like Landorus or something like that, Landorus. So, something like that. I'll have to look it up again. But anyways, he's gonna notice something different. There's gonna be this thing called, it's called like Loris's fallen day, his death rather. And essentially, it unleashes what is known as force, or elements in nature. And then there's going to be like all these people that get killed, and this is going to be one of the major points. But there's going to be two people that are going to come and stop him, try to. Eugene's on the left, and then Mahalis is on the right. So essentially, they're essentially trying to say like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? You use all your force, you will die. But of course, he does it. But he did it on his own free will, if I remember correctly. He wasn't possessed. So they're wondering what happened to him. Right, force. Okay, so now here's Balka. Power surge. People getting killed. Mind you, this is probably one of the biggest tragedies in the whole Tales series. You know, people usually die in the series. Here's a bunch of NPCs dying before the end of the game, before the game even begins. Derailed. Okay. So, Balka, for some reason this reminds me of Casper the Friendly Ghost. The part where they're going through that hidden passage. The music. So here's Claire and Bag. There's Claire. And Bag's gonna tell her to run. He can't control his force. Get out of here, Claire. Run! He's gonna freeze her. Oh, and they're not in Balka now. They're actually in Suzu, the town. So he froze her solid. Alright, so 1 year later. Okay, so now we're gonna have two more characters introduced. Now we're gonna have Eugene and Mo. Eugene is the tall guy and Mo is the short guy. Okay, so the guy on Vag's right shoulder, left, looking at him on this angle, that's Zappi. Zappi. So there's Claire, she's frozen. Still alive, but frozen. And this is the church, meeting hall. It froze it. Vag had what was also known as a forced runway, where his force was out of control. So this is Mo and Eugene. They're going to introduce themselves. Why are you here? Okay, so I want to try and include the voice clips. Here, I'll be quiet really quick. Here's another voice clip audio. This music's really awesome. Okay, so going back to when they opened the door, Vague said, is it Doka? Dotka? I forget. But essentially what's happening so far is that Vague is saying, are you them? And then Mo says, yes, you know, my name is Mo. Boku wa Mo. And then the camera turns to Eugene, and then Eugene introduces himself saying like who he is. Says his first and last name, and then he says, we have come looking for you. And then he puts out his hand saying like, you know, he wants to help us out. So now we're here in a frozen church. This song that's playing is called Scratch on the Ice. Memorize this right here. This just means next. This is the names that are introduced. So this is Vague. And essentially what's going on right now is Vague has stated that, you know, he's like, how? He's like, how do you know my name? Why are you here, essentially? So, Eugene and Mo have come from a village, or rather, from the kingdom of Balka. Kind of spoiling the game a little bit, but it'll be easier to explain. Essentially what's happening is they know that Vague has special powers. Vague doesn't really know what powers he has 100%, even though he knows that he really can't control them. And not only that, but because of this, he is able to do certain things that not too many people realize they can master. So he's just essentially trying to deny that he has these powers because it would essentially, you know, bring more problems than there already are. So they're essentially saying, why don't you listen to our story, you know, have you know, so essentially that's what Tales of Rebirth is. You know, they come to introduce themselves, and they know they want to talk to Vague about something. So essentially Vague's saying that there is nothing to talk about, leave. And then Mo is just essentially telling him to reconsider because he believes that they can become great friends, and he thinks he can trust him. Essentially saying that, you know, he's just countering him with everything he says. He's like, how can you be so sure about that? Because, you know, he doesn't know what the truth is. And then Vague says, Mo says, essentially he knows the answer to his doubts, to Vague's doubts. He's like, I know you better than you think I do. And then essentially he goes off, he's like, I know the answer to your doubts. He's like, what answer? He's like, don't be silly. He's like, what answer? So he's telling him to reconsider again, because he says if he doesn't want to talk to him now, then he'll just come over to him. So Mo is telling Vague to reconsider. He says because if he actually listens to him, like, you know, please come here and just, you know, listen to us. Please give it a chance. He's like, if you don't want to, Vague, he's like, I'll come sit next to you and we can just talk about this. You know, please come to us or we'll come to you, you know. So then he freezes him. And then he says, he's like, you seem to be able to use the Force, Eugene. He's like, yes, it's more than I can ever imagine. Better than I could imagine. He says, what does he say? I know the last part says, he's like, next time don't come so close, essentially. He says, do not bother me. He says, what am I he's like, what did I tell you? He's like, what do you think about that? So essentially, he's talking about how he's like, I didn't want to have to force this, you know, use force, like actual like brute force. He's like, but it seems like we have no other choice. He's like, I wanted this to go easy, but it seems like it won't. So Mo's like, well, okay, then he's like, well, what do we do? What are the conditions? Rather, you know, what do we do next? What's our next option, and what should I do? So Mo's gonna fight Vagu, and or Vag, and he's gonna say, don't use any force, and he's like, don't destroy the target, or rather, for 60 seconds or 1 minute. He's essentially referring to Claire, or he's referring to Vag. Do not hurt Vag for 60 seconds, or no, he could be referring to Claire. Because this part always confused me. You know, he could be referring to Vag, but they came here for. Well, they don't mean don't kill him, but like maybe because Mo is powerful. He really is. He is. So that's another way of looking at it. So he says, do not destroy the target, because he wants him to take it easy on him. He's like, wow. He's like, I'm sorry. He's essentially saying, he's like, what, you don't think I can do this? He's like, what, you don't think it's possible? He's like, you doubt what I can do? And then Eugene, being Mo's superior, essentially tells him that he doesn't like him rebuttaling questions with other questions. Instead of, you know, the typical, like, why doesn't he just do what he's told and try to learn from him? And so Vag is, you know, in his own thoughts still. Again, look at what he did. He froze the church. You can see, like, the wind. You can see icicles everywhere. Look, even Mo's even trapped in a little prison. Even my little mouse can't even free him from his ice slumber. And not to mention, I always like how he does this. Like, you know, he traps, like, they can't, like, walk on an angle and get out. He just, like, he freezes them from the sides. Unless they squeeze through somehow. I always thought that was funny. But, he's just essentially saying, he's like, what are you guys talking about? He's like, hurry up and leave. Or he's like, quickly tell me. And then Mo essentially says, he's like, what's the matter, Vag? Do you want to? He's like, are you already trying to call it quits? Because, you know, are you already feeling tired? And then Vag's like, don't be silly. Okay, so now this next part, this can actually go 3 different ways. You can actually tie Mo, like you don't actually beat him. You can actually have him beat you, or you beat him, and then there's like different cutscenes you can get for this. But this is a tutorial battle, and the stuff that the text comes up in this it's actually something that doesn't really come up in the other game. This is like a different tutorial battle. So here we have Mo. He has 1,038 health. Okay, so Tales of Rebirth is really interesting. Okay, so this is tactics. This pretty much just allows us to introduce like how the game works. These are items. We can't use items because we don't have any. And this is the setup that we have. So different equipment. You know, this is like a mandatory stuff. You don't have access to this yet. So look at top where it says Battle Help. It says double tap. If you double tap the movement in any direction, you'll be able to run like this. And if you actually, you can actually, this right here says you can actually control like what direction you want to swing your weapon. Again, you know, if you played any other Tales game, the moving mechanics, the attacking animation, the default keys are pretty much the same. The only thing that's different about Tales of Rebirth compared to most Tales games is the force cube, and there's different types of things in this game that make up what it does. But pretty much, you have your basic Tales game movement strategies, and everything's different. Another thing that's not in this game is the TP system, which is what they replaced with something else. So this is the defend. That opens up default. This opens up the menu. And Mo tries to leave. Oh, there we go. Mo's like essentially saying that, you know, it's time to end this, or he's had enough. He's had enough of this. Okay, so to make a long story short, Vague is like very impressed. Like he's trying to understand like what he's like, what is this power? He's like, your flames and my ice. He's like, are they all the same? Like he's coming to the realization that there's other people that can use powers like him. Okay, so Eugene essentially says that, you know, this is what is known as force, or the elemental, and essentially talking about how people can, it can be very useful if people can learn to control it. And he's like, force? And they both nod, yes, force. And he says, yes, this is the embodiment of force, the force cube. And they're essentially going to talk about the history of how, like, it's always existed, everything's made of energy, you know, like that scientific perspective. If you've ever played Tales of the Abyss, you know, the idea was with Pomicry research, how, like, everything was, you know, made up of different elements, and, you know, kind of like the same thing. But in Tales of Rebirth's case, the Force Cube is actually was created, like, between, like, more, for like, spiritual energy and pretty much elemental energy, or rather, you know, everything that makes up the living, essentially like chemistry and just the energy in general. And it's just like there's like these different types of energy, and they all have like different traits and history and different effects. So, and essentially he's going to go off explaining, like, you know, how Vague, you know, like what a forced runway is, and how it pretty much trapped Claire, and, you know, Vague wants to free her, but, you know, Mo was telling Vague the only reason why you really couldn't free her was because you can't melt ice with ice. You can only clone. Like, for example, you know, if I took water and froze it, for example, you could only go so far with that, you know, unless you melt it or do like some sort of an opposing effect. It's not going to have that opposite effect. You're just going to keep adding to it instead, rather. And they talk about how, and then now Eugene's essentially talking about how Force was created, like, from a creator, and it's been here since the beginning of time. Okay, so now here's an important turn. If you can see this, like this blue just right here. This is Japanese. This is one of the keywords in Tales of Rebirth. There's what is known as humas, which are humans, and then there's what is known as the gajimas, or how you pronounce it, because I always forget. I know Japanese, but I have to look at the spelling. The Romaji is just not coming to, or the spelling, if you were to write it out, isn't coming to me right now. So essentially, you have what is known as the Beastmen tribes and the human race. So Eugene is 100% a Beastman, like, or he's another animal. He's not a human, but he's sort of like a human. You know, he's still like different character. He's like a Black Panther instead. You know, a cross between like a Black Panther and a human. So, and then there's what is known as there's a lot of segregation, racism, sexism. That's essentially what Tales of Rebirth is like dealing with. And there's other stuff too, but mostly those are the three biggest things. And this game is really well written, actually, if I haven't mentioned that yet. Probably my favorite video game of all time. Out of all the Tales games, easily. But Eugene mentioned that, you know, there used to be force that was only in Gajimas like him, but then Vague was like, well, I don't. He's like, is that so? He's like, well, how about like, then how is it possible for like a human like him to have tamed some sort of powers like that?
ある時からヒューマの中にもフォルス能力者が現れるようになったんだよ。
And essentially, Mo's essentially saying that, you know, it's always been this way, but at the same time, though, there have been people have existed with these powers for ever since the beginning of time, and you know, it's just certain people realize they have it, and some people have had it, but they never realized it.
今ではガジュマやヒューマという種族の区別なく、いろいろな種類のフォルスを持った能力者がいるんだ。
And he's essentially saying that at one point, you know, I mean, even to this day, like all humans and everybody essentially has some sort of force, whether they want to realize it or not.
君のフォルスは氷。
But Mo said it depends on how you use it and what you do with it that, you know, it really stands out. But in this case, he's saying, well, he's like, in my case, or he's like, no, he's like, your force is ice in this case. And then Vague's like, ice force.
君は氷を自在に操ることができるでしょ?
He's like, yeah. He's like, well, he's like, and then he starts asking, you know, how good he is with it. Had he mastered the art of the ice? He's like, yes, you demonstrate it well, because again, you know, look at the church, but you know, couldn't he control it though? He's like, well, you know, he thinks so, but he doesn't. He wants to know how he can save Claire though.
それは君のフォルスが暴走した時の氷だからだよ。
And then Mo essentially says it's because, you know, it's essentially because of his force that this also happened. Again, you know, force can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing because those who know how to control it and don't know how to control it can actually, it results in some sort of, you know, it can resort in a bad thing.
心の力であるフォルスは持つ者の心が不安定だと過度に反応し制御できなくなる。
And then Eugene goes off stating that what had happened was it was a forced runway. Or rather, you know, Mo will explain it a little bit more. This game pretty much talks about that. But Eugene is talking about how, you know, because of that, you know, Eugene, like, his heart reacted to it. And Vague's heart wasn't really set on controlling the Force. He tried to control it, but ended up having a forced runway instead because he lacked the control necessary to maintain such power.
君の力の覚醒は突然のことだった。準備ができていなかった君の心は力を制御できずに彼女を。
Essentially what happened was because he couldn't control it, this is what had happened. And that this can bring suffering and bad things to people. Or good things. Depending on how. So it's always important that people should really watch what they do and be careful with how it happens.
それがフォルスの暴走なんだ。
But at the same time though, Mo was also mentioning that, you know, the reason why Claire wasn't frozen he couldn't thaw her out was because you can't thaw ice with ice. It just makes more ice. So that's what Mo was saying. So he says, well, you know, Vague, he's like, let's try it with a different, you know, because his force is flame. So he's like, well, you know, ice melts flame, or ice is melted by flames.
この氷は今のお前の能力では消すことは不可能だ。
He's like, and then he's essentially just kind of expanding on what he said, that, you know, he says that explains why you weren't able to free her when you did, because ice is frozen, you know, you'd have to use like simple science to really figure this out. Ice melts because of fire, because you're changing the temperature So really, okay, this is simple science, but when something is frozen solid and you can tap on it very carefully, the molecules inside are compacted together. However, if you were to burn ice, it simply melts in the water. Reason why is because you're converting it from a solid state to a liquid. So you're heating the atoms up. It's like for the same reason that you could think of like the sun, for example, a big ball of energy. How something like that big can be so hot and yet it's so bright, for example. And the reason why is because the energy that makes up the sun, what is known as like nuclear fusions and fissions, are two different things. You can essentially have, like for example, if you don't know this, like if you were to go outside and see the sun from the earth, the sun it's very misleading. You know, the sun literally looks like it's the same size as the moon, right? But really, you'd be surprised. The sun is actually 93 million miles away from the earth, and it's like 1.3 million times bigger than the earth, or at least that's how they say it is, rather. And what's really interesting is, you know, flames are opposite of ice because, you know, with ice it's just solid states that it's frozen. So, but if it's really warm out, stuff's always constantly in motion, and therefore you can have like these liquid plasma effects that can melt stuff. So like for example with ice, it's a solid object because it's not moving, it's compacted together. But with like something like the sun, for example, which is actually another state of matter, it doesn't have to necessarily be just a gas, it could be like just plasma. You know, you can essentially say that, you know, everything's just constantly in motion, and now, you know, it's got all this room to move, and therefore all this energy is able to manipulate. So what Mo's going to demonstrate is how he's going to weaken Claire's frozen state with flames, and it's going to cause all the ice to react that way, and therefore weakening that significant hold of a solid state, and therefore that's why ice is so thin all of a sudden, because when exposed to heat, stuff reacts and it starts moving very fast. Molecules, subatomic particles. He's like, but what about Claire? He's like, well, it worked. So he's like, leave it to me, Bag. He's like, if you're ice, then I'm your fire. He's like, this fire will melt that ice. He's like flames of fire. He's like, melt this. He's essentially saying, you know, summoning flames to melt the ice. Wake her from her sleep. And he's like, quick, Bag, now. And I just love how, like, he skips through the ice animation. So Claire's still alive. There's Zoppy. He's like, are you alright? She's like, Bag? He's like, are you? No, he's just saying, like, is she alright? Like, is there any pain or suffering? Can I do something for you? And she's like, I. And I love how he walks right through Zoppy's little animation there. He's like, Claire. He's like, are you sure you don't need help? She's like, no, I'm fine, Bag. This part always makes me chuckle. Literally what this translates to is that she's like, it's a bit cold in here. She's like, I'm gonna go out and stand out in the sun. It's like, well, looking at the church, I wonder why. It's always funny. He's like, wait. She's like, wait. He's like, wait, Claire. He's like, Claire, I'm really sorry. She's like, about what? She's like, what on earth happened? He's like, what, you don't remember? So essentially she's gonna like tell it from her side. If you remember that opening cutscene, she got frozen and Vague was essentially like, she lost conscious after that, but she was still alive. Very interesting story. If you actually froze somebody in real life, they could still be alive, and it's like their body, you're chronologically stopping them. It's kind of hard to explain. Like, you can technically freeze somebody to death to the point where like they can, they're still alive, but it's like you could stop their aging. You might be familiar with like, I forget what it's really called, like chronology or something like that, where like you freeze somebody and then you thaw them out in the future, and it's supposed to be like, you know, freeze me, like unthaw me like 100 years from now, and like see what the future is. Really cool idea, but I don't know physically if anybody's ever chronologically been frozen in real life. I've never met somebody that was. And essentially, Mo kind of butts in and says, well, you know, he's like, it's thanks to him that we saved you. So they all technically saved her. But it was thanks to Mo and Eugene and Vague. And she's like, who are you guys? So Vague's gonna essentially say that, you know, he's like, well, this guy helped me out. These guys helped me out. And he's like, nice to meet you. He's like, my name is Mo. And this is Eugene Gallardo? Or how you pronounce that in English, I'll have to look it up. But it's Eugene's real name. And then Eugene goes off to explain more, pretty much like explaining how they saved her, but it was thanks to, you know, he tried hard, you know, he really spent a lot of time trying to get her out ahead of time. Essentially saying that he didn't really stop until he, but it was thanks to them too that, you know, Vague was able to achieve that because of Mo's flames, and Vague tried something different. He's like, I'm really sorry about this. And essentially Mo goes off saying that, you know, it was not Vague's intention to have you be frozen. He's like, I'm sure. He's like, I'm sure what happened back there is like, we can forgive you for it. So essentially, Vague has a lot of scratches on his arms because he tried to break the ice with his hands. And she's like, just to save me, huh? Essentially, he says he didn't stop because he didn't want to. He felt like it was like some sort of guilt that it was her fault. Like, it was his fault that that happened. And essentially, Vague's not saying, like, you know, he's like, from now on, he's like, I'll watch over you, or you can watch over me better. And then Claire, you know, because technically Vague loves her, and she knows he does, but she won't admit it. So what ends up happening is we can just safely say that, you know, she's trying to play it off right now. you know, because she's shy. But essentially she's saying, ah, Veg, she's like, I have to run home and tell my parents. She's like, I gotta tell my parents that I'm thawed. Now this is what's really funny about this. She was frozen for 1 year. So imagine, Vag didn't just live in this church for a year. He came back and forth every day to see if he could get her out of there. I'm surprised the villagers didn't help him out. But what's really interesting, though, is, you know, Claire gets out of the church, she regains her conscience, and essentially she now has the ability to remember that her mother is just somehow at home cooking, you know. So I always thought that was kind of amusing how, like, you know, she just kind of knows what her family's up to, like, at this very moment, despite the fact that they haven't seen her in a year, and this is, like, where they just leave the church and come out, or the town meeting, or the town's meeting. So that's really interesting. So she's like, oh, she's like, I better go give my parents relief, you know, let them know what happened. She's like, thank you again, Bag. She's like, I can't do much hospitalization, but she's like, but I can cook. She's like, if it's not too much of a hassle, or rather a problem, she's like, can you invite those two as well? Or she's like, we have to get back to my house. She's like, we're cooking a big dinner. And she's like, well, she's like, I'll see you there. She's like, we might need to head back home to get some rest. And then, okay, so Eugene and Mo are kind of invite themselves because they need to talk about. So really, Claire didn't just invite them right away, even though she would. But essentially, she was referring to Bag, saying we have to get back home and get some rest. And this is before, you know, Eugene and Mo eventually start talking about how they have to have a long conversation with Mo and Eugene, talking to Bag about like why they're here to see him, and talk about like some of the cool stuff that they have yet to share with the world, and they want everybody else to catch on to as well. So Eugene's like, wow, that's, you know, she's a really good girl. She listens. And then Mo's like, yeah, that's... He's like, I could go for a feast right now. And then Mo's like, he's like, saying like how like he's going hungry, and therefore it's, you know, it's just draining them all out of all that force. So he's hungry because he used so much force. And then Eugene's like, don't do this now, Mo. He's like, I'm sorry, but it's just like that. So then Eugene or Mo's like, but he's like, Bag, he's like, we really have to have a conversation about this. He's like, there's a reason we came to see you. He's like, we need to talk about this. He's like, I'll listen right here. He's like, if possible, he's like, I'd like to talk to you in private. And then Bag's like, oh. He's like, what? It's a flowered crow. It's an ice crow. It's a virus. He's like, it's coming this way. Here we go. Okay, so fighting in this game is kind of the same, but there's something I have to explain. Okay, so you might be familiar with the grade system in this game. What's really interesting about this Tales game, this is the only Tales game that has it's probably like the most complicated way to get grade. You cannot, there's only certain parts of getting grade, and there's like what is known as when you're fighting technically a boss, the grade is multiplied by 10. And I just found this out recently. This makes a lot of sense. So this is one part where, like, you know, if you kill certain enemies, you get certain grade at a certain level. Or I mean times 10. So this is a good example of this. So this is these are flower crows. And then this is like a bison, or it's like a boar. Oh, by the way, you can actually adjust semi-auto to manually by pushing start. It's like saying, we got this. So there's just a good example. You know, 30-second finish, no guarded finish. There are certain groups that you can only get certain grade so many times, and then that's it. So. And then he's like, and then Veg's like coming to the realization. This is a good song. Like, really, I like listening to this one. See, when I first played Tales of Rebirth, I could not understand for the life of me how the hell this game never got localized. Like, I mean, this game is just, it was awesome. It made me really think about stuff. Like, it's just really that fascinating. So anyways, if you've never played Tales of Rebirth, so there's a bunch of, again, like I said, with everything's like a living organism, you know, including viruses and evolution. This game's got a lot of interesting plot twists in the series. So this is a really good one. So Vay comes to the realization that there's a bunch of viruses, rather parasites in this case. You know, like living organisms. You know, the same virus that you can get sick from. So Vag's like, he's like, well, what the hell's with all these viruses? What are they doing in this village? And then Eugene goes off explaining like what a virus is and how it can evolve. It can start off as as one thing, and it can evolve into something very tragic. And then Mo adds, it essentially can turn not only into anything, but this is like the principle of what nature is. You know, it's a sad part of life. You know, it's everywhere. He's like force runways, or essentially he's saying like force, you know, out of control force, virus utopias everywhere. He's like, what the hell is going on here? So Mo and Eugene were essentially here to save, you know, they were essentially meeting up with companions because they wanted to save the world in their own way. But they met Vag, and then now Vag's like coming to the realization that he essentially has to team up with Mo and Eugene to make this a reality. So he's like, Mo, he's like, you said to save the world, correct? Is that right? He's like, sorry. He's like, I'm at a limit right now. And then he essentially says, he's like, the story will be long. He's like, will you be willing to listen? He's like, and allow Mo to eat as well with you. So essentially, you know, they want to explain why they're here. He's like, I understand. He's like, this way. He's like, please follow me. And then he's like, thank you, Claire. He's like, thanks for everything. Alright, so here's where this is where things are going to get really confusing. So this just essentially says Mo and Eugene have joined the party. Alright, so here's where there's a bunch of text. Okay, it says welcome to, it's essentially the village of, Suzu. This is Mo's Battle Book Part 1. He's like, what are you doing so happy? I'm making a battle book about us fighting viruses and viruses. So yeah, that's essentially talking about Mo and Eugene. Well, Mo was essentially saying he's making memories about fighting stuff, and then Veg looked at him like, well, he said, what do you mean by that? And he explained, to make memories. Why would you want to do such a thing? And so they talk about how with the battle book, you can essentially gain knowledge and information, and that's essentially what it is. Battle book has been acquired. Like I said, I am going back and translating all the stuff that you see, but I'm giving it to you in a nutshell what this means. So essentially it's giving us a tutorial, no or yes. Do you want to take a look at the battle book? And then here we have a bunch of other tutorials. Okay, so you see all this green stuff. This means it hasn't been read yet. So this is all in Japanese, and I know what you're probably thinking, what does this all translate to? Okay, so this section right here, all of this. Okay, so let's get started with you don't really have all the information right offhand, but this will pretty much come to you as you progress through the whole game. I have it on my save file. I have all this stuff already unlocked. This is all basic advanced knowledge on like how this game works. This game explains everything. I mean, that's why I love this game. This game's awesome. I don't know what this very bottom one does. I always forget. I think it might be how many times you cleared the bonus dungeon. Then again, I could be wrong. But essentially all this is just records of like, how long you've been playing, what your total grade is right now. That's what this is right here. Play time, how much damage you've done, how many battles you've encountered, how many enemies you've killed, how much damage you've taken. That's essentially what that section does. This is pretty much just covering like the battle system itself, what this allows you to do. Gonna have to come back to that. A couple of these aren't highlighted yet. This one right here, I'll tell you right now, kind of going to the grade system, I'm going to mention this right now because this is probably one of the biggest plots that we have to talk about. There's certain grade at certain points you can get. Now, if you played this game enough, you're probably better off playing, if you're going to go grade grinding, you're better off playing on the higher difficulties because it'll give you a better multiplier. But at the same time, though, if you play this game one time, okay, you still want to beat it on hard mode. It's not that hard of a game if you know how this game works. But the problem is, though, when you do grade grinding, though, there's certain grade that you're not going to be able, there's a grade shop in this game, obviously. But once you buy stuff in this game with grade, you can't refund it like Tales of Symphonia, or if you kill the final boss, that it gives you an additional 1,000 or something like that. So essentially you have to get really clever with how you get certain grade. And if you play your cards right, this game will give you enough grade, and you don't have to buy everything on your next playthrough. But it's always a good idea if you want to have enough. So that's a good idea. So there's that. So let me find the battle book again. No, that's not it. Okay, that's the synapse. That's the world map. Okay, okay, so this is what I was talking about. It shows you the map. So this is where we're at right now. This is Suzu, and Balka is right here. That's where Balka is. So essentially what we have to do, this is what the story consists of. You travel down here, you go back tracking a few places, you eventually end up in a town called Menal, you eventually find out you have to go somewhere else, you travel, so essentially, to make a long story short, you're traveling all the way down here, all the way over here, all the way over here, all around the world, and then you go to Balka too, many different times, and it's sort of out of order how you do this, but eventually you go to all these different places trying to solve the issue. So that's asking if we want a quick save. Actually, no, I take it back. Maybe not quick save. Alright, so here we have easy mode, normal mode. Let's see here, justifications. Again, you should know what those do by now if I haven't explained them already. Okay, so let's start with this. Alright, so this is items, or arts, but we can't use it. This is enhance, strengthening weapons and adding additional stats, and awakening abilities, but we don't have access to that yet, so this is tactics for the characters. This right here is cooking. This is the options. This is library. This is load. This is quick save. This is status and titles. This is... okay, this is what I was looking for. Okay, so every time you see something green highlighted, this means that there's something new in this field. So there's a lot of stuff in here. So this is essentially just teaching you the tutorial of the game, rather. And you might notice how, like, we can't select anything, but it's still green. Well, if you just keep this highlighted, it cancels it out. But as soon as something like this comes up, it cancels it automatically. Again, like I said, there's a lot of stuff in this game, so it's better that I'm kind of explaining this as I go. And believe me, we'll be taking a look at all this too. What this all means, how this works. You know, even with basic knowledge of this game, you could still play it very well. You just got to know how to beat this game. Okay, and here's what I was. Here's the movement patterns again. There's the battle help. Movements. See, unlike most Tales games, this game actually goes greatly in depth with how this works. Like how the fields work, how the battle mechanics work, what to do in certain situations. This game gives you a lot of advice. It really does. But this game is a pain in the ass to beat too. I would say the real Tales of Destiny 2, the Japanese only Tales of Destiny 2, that is the hardest Tales game. This is just enemy status. I always like this animation. That was always cool. Some of these have actually been recycled from Tales of Destiny 2. Like I said before, when Tales of Rebirth came out, it was technically the second Tales game on the PS2. It was Tales of Rebirth, then you had Tales of Destiny 2. It was the first Tales game. And then these games got ported over to the PSP, and there was extra content in the PS2 version compared to the PSP and the PS2 version. What's actually really interesting is Tales of Rebirth actually and Tales of Destiny 2 are technically the only two Tales games that have what is known as God Mode, and neither one of these games was released outside of Japan. So that's really interesting. So, alright, so hey guys, I'm gonna make a save state here, and I'll see you in part 2, or however this works, because I stayed up all night. Holy shit, man, I am tired right now. But I will see you all next time in the next episode, and hope this works. I'll explain everything then, and we will keep going from there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, because I sure did.